We have lots of distance to cover. I think when you leave here today, you will have a new perspective, a new view of the dental industry, of the dental landscape, and of dental practice. And change often causes people to be upset. And so when I talk about the future of dental practice, I often get people who are upset because you come into dentistry with a certain view of how it will go into the future, and when that future is interrupted or altered, there is an emotional response. So it is not uncommon for people to get a little upset in terms of my presentation. Does that make sense so far, yes? Okay. Thank you for having me. And I want to thank Raffi as well. He's been on a campaign to have me come here for the last couple of years. And I am privileged to be here, and I want to thank you for the opportunity. So we're going to talk about the future of dental practice. And there's a wonderful quote I want to read, and it says, when it comes to the future, there are three kinds of people: those who let it happen, those who make it happen, and those who wondered what happened. Where are you in that formula? Are you waiting for something to happen? Are you ready to make something new happen? Or are you just going to put your head in the sand? I really think that what you'll begin to see, Israel's a little behind the times, but the future doesn't care about what you have or what you think. It happens. So I've worked all over the world, not in Russia yet, and thankfully, but everywhere else. And so I have worked with thousands of dentists. The work that I currently do, and we'll get deeply into this, is working in the domain of group practice. Now, when you consider group practice, you have a view of a couple dentists getting together within an enclave of 3 or 4 providers, and that you would call a group. I work with groups in the United States that have 800 practices that do over $1.5 billion a year in revenue. And they're not uncommon. And when I look at Canada, when I look at Chile, when I look at the UK, when I look at where I'm working in Singapore and Jakarta and Hong Kong, these things are beginning to emerge. And they're emerging with great potency and great revenue and great financing. So something's occurring that I want to inform you about. And so I want to do a kind of, how do you listen to this? How do you engage with me to get the most out of this particular program? Now, most of you are dentists, I would assume, yes? And so where you're looking from into the future is you're looking from where you practice, your staff, your 4 walls, your society, so you look from the inside out. Where I am looking and where I'll be speaking from today is from the outside in. So I'll be looking differently at dental practice in the dental industry, in the dental world than you do. And I think you have to look from my point of view to really understand what is occurring. So the future hasn't yet happened. And so anything is possible. I want to be really clear, which means that what I'm going to talk about, I could be full of, you can fill in the blank, I don't want to get too scatologic here, but I could be wrong. I could be way off base. So I'm going to tell you how I would like you to listen to me. That will give you an opportunity to hear things you haven't heard before. The first thing is, this is not the truth. What I'm about to say, this is my view, my opinion, from my 30 years of experience in the industry and where I'm working now, to see what is going to be the future of dental practice. But it isn't necessarily the truth. I'm not asking you to believe me. Belief is very strong, but belief often filters the way you see the world. And the way you see the world is the way you act within the world, and how you act determines the results you produce and the kind of strategy and tactics you take. So I don't want you to believe me. I would like you to suspend your beliefs for a while, and you can pick them up when you walk out the door. I'm asking you to consider, to think, to try on what I am talking about, and then I'd like you to see I'd like you to think for yourself. Ultimately, you are responsible for the choices that you make. I cannot choose for you the future that you will take in dentistry, or how you will establish your practice, or the future of the business of your practice. And every choice has a consequence. Every time you make a choice, no choice is a consequence. Now, a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is in the U.S. dental industry, but it parallels the other countries that I'm working in. So in the United States, the healthcare industry is a $3 trillion industry. Dentistry is a $140 billion industry. And the average dental practice in terms of across the United States revenues is about $800,000. Now I want to talk about the difference between $1 billion, $1 million. So if I count 2 seconds, if I count 2 seconds for $1 billion, if I count in seconds $1 billion, it will take me 31 years. If I count in seconds $1 million, it will take me 12 days. And if I count in seconds $1 trillion, it will take me 30,000 years. That is a long time. The United States healthcare industry is a $3 trillion industry. So dentistry is a small speck in that particular area. And the influence of the healthcare industry in terms of the future of dentistry is going to get stronger. To date, most dental practices, most dentistry has been somewhat independent of the healthcare industry. Okay, ooh, that scared me. So when we take a look at the revenues and how things are working, the healthcare in the United States is about 18% of the gross national product. And what we pay in the United States compared to the other countries in terms of the amount of money spent, as you can see, is about $9,000 to $10,000 per person on the health care of the individuals. And that is not going, although they're trying in our government to reduce that, it will never be reduced. And the amount paid for, we have insurance, and we could talk about that. You now have HMOs. You now have some insurance in this country. Most of it is pay by procedure, which is going to go away, by the way. That will change dramatically. So when we take a look at how much we're spending out of pocket and how much we're spending by insurance, it's going up. And the amount of wages that people are earning is staying pretty flat. So the amount of money that people have for dentistry in this world, in the United States and in most other countries, is becoming less and less and less. If we take a look at the numbers closely in the United States about where healthcare is, you can see that dental expenses is in the purple, and dentistry is in the purple, and healthcare is in the blue. And what we notice is that in the earlier time, and I think I can read these numbers, up to 2002, dentistry was increasing at a significant pace at about 3.3%. And then over time, it became less. By 2008, it was only 2% of the expenditure in healthcare. And today, it's actually minus at minus 6%. So the amount of money being spent per capita in dentistry is going down. But the amount of money being overall spent in dentistry is going up. Now, you need to think about this closely. So there's more money being spent on dentistry overall, but the per capita, the per patient spending is going down. That will significantly change how dental practice works. So dentistry, oh, this is a good one. Do you mind? Is this vodka? Because I could use a little. Okay, that feels better. So dentistry in our country is about $140 billion per year. I couldn't get an accurate figure on this, but this is my summation, that dentistry worldwide is about $335 billion. That's a lot of money. And when you look at the profit margin of most dental practices, and it may not be accurate for Israel, but if we take the overall how much margin or profit is in the dental practice, it's somewhere between 7 and 12%. Compared to the companies on the New York Stock Exchange, it does better than they do. Pretty clear so far, yes? Dentistry has never lost money, even in the Great Recession of 2008. It always stayed above the line. And it is extraordinarily fragmented. If I would look in here and I would look at the dental practices in this country, how many practice alone? I would say the majority of you practice alone, if you're a dentist, yes? You have your own practice, you have your own staff, you have your own equipment, and everything that you do in your practice is done in every other practice. So you have all these functions that are going on in your practice that are being replicated and duplicated in every other practice. And as we will see, the larger entities take those functions and they put it into one arena, and one person that does it in your office can now do it because of IT, because of artificial intelligence, because of the spreadsheets, because of the analysis and analytics and data processing and big data. They can now manage that same function in multiple practices, so the expense to do what you do per patient goes down. So in a large group practice, the amount of money spent on the processes and functions is less per patient than what you're doing in your solo or single practice. So here we have an increase in the amount of being spent on dentistry, yet each dentist is having a pretty flat line, as you'll see, or a lower amount of margin, revenue, profit, whatever you like to call it. And the cost per patient is going up in solo practice, and the cost per patient is going down in group practice. Clear so far, yes? Nod, go ahead.
The cost per patient in the group practice is going down?
Yes.
What happened in Israel that...
Can you hear him in the back, or do we need a microphone? Here, let's do it this way. By the way, I invite questions. This is important. I don't know how to turn these things on. You're a dentist, you can figure it out, huh? Oh, you got it.
What happened in Israel that in the last years, group practices are going bankrupt?
That occurred in the United States in the late 90s, early 2000s. They were unclear about how to organize themselves to be able to deliver the kind of care at less cost. But today, they're flourishing. So one must look at the success of today as opposed to yesterday. When you have, and I'll mention some names that you may be familiar with, you have Heartland Dental, Pacific Dental, Aspen, Comfort. They are they're building or acquiring 2 practices per week in the United States. And they're doing $1.4 billion to almost $2 billion a year in dentistry. And then you have the issue with the younger dentists, who, because it costs so much to go to dental school in the United States, between $300,000 and $400,000, they have no money when they get out, and the only place they can work is in group practice. So group practices before didn't have the same management, the same leadership, the same financing, the same processes that they do now. And now that they have those, their success rate, and we'll see the statistic, solo practice in the United States is shrinking at 7% per year. Group practice is increasing at 20% per year. The statistics are obvious. Now, there's a lot of resistance and all of that stuff going on, and we actually will address that a bit, but it can't be stopped. We're past the tipping point. And if we look at the UK, if I look at Singapore, if I look at where else I'm working, it is expanding. I learned last night that in Israel you can have non-dental ownership. A non-dentist can own a practice here, or a dental practice. Well, that opens the gate. And we'll talk about the money that's rolling in to do that. When you have an entity that's doing $350 billion a year, and I believe the next slide is pretty interesting. First of all, in order to be able to afford to stay current in dental practice, you have to buy all this incredible equipment. Each going for what, $100,000 US per piece of equipment. Your CEREC machine, your laser, your CAD cam. Who can afford that in a solo practice? And let me ask you a question. How often do you use that equipment? In a group practice, it is highly used because you have multiple doctors using the same piece of equipment over and over again. In your practice, you'll use it not that frequently. Therefore, the cost per patient, it goes down, but in a solo practice goes up because this equipment is so expensive. How else can you afford to stay current with this? When you look at dentistry worldwide at $335 billion, it does better than General Motors, it does better than Apple, it does better than Intel, and all those folks are here. So dentistry is a really large entity, and when you look from the investment bankers, and we will take a look from their point of view, the equity partners, and we will look from their point of view, they want to put their money in a place that is going to give them the highest return on investment. And what they're seeing is the best place to put your money is in dentistry. So right now in the States and in certain parts of Europe, I deal with equity partners all the time. They call me up and they say, I have a check for $100 million. I'd like to roll up some practices. Great. Well, there's a whole story about that. They don't, if you roll them up incorrectly, they're going to fail, as you point out. It's got to be a well-established, generated, high-end corporate structure that can deliver the results. But the money is coming in at a very high frequency. The profit margin in a small practices are going down, and it's better than the New York Stock Exchange, as I said. So all the money, at least in the U.S. and Canada, New Zealand, Australia, where I'm working, dentistry is seen as a great investment. So they're putting their money into dental practices and consolidating those. When you look from the outside in, like I look, the economics are changing. Dentistry is becoming much more expensive. You're a solo practice. You have to buy all this equipment. You have to pay your staff. The staff wants raises. Rent is going up. Releases are going up. You're competing. You've now got, you got to play on the web now. You've got to do SEO. You have to do your Facebook. You have to do all this other stuff in order to compete in the market. And it doesn't get less expensive doing it that way. It gets more expensive over time. So the economics of dentistry are changing, and particularly stressful on a single practice. The population is increasing, but the reason that 50% of the people in the United States cannot see a dentist is because they can't afford a dentist. But the link to the systemic diseases, the chronic diseases of diabetes and heart disease, are becoming more significant, and the government and the pressures are for dentistry to see more people, but how are they going to generate that economic the balance? People have less money to spend on dentistry, and they must see a dentistry to reduce their health care costs. So we have those pressures going on as well. Access is really a key. As I said, the greatest impediment to access is cost. Supply and demand. I don't know how many, what do you have, 6,000 dentists in Israel? Is that the accurate number, something like that? Okay, huh? More? How many more? And the ratio, and I don't know these facts, and the ratio of dentists per population, so in our country, in the U.S., it's about one dentist per 1,800 people. What is it in Israel?
One per 800. One per 800.
One for 800? Wow. Well, that's pretty tight. There's only one other place in the U.S. that has that, and that's Utah. But that's a whole other story. One per 800? What's the population that sees it? Everybody sees a dentist? 80%, 60%? What's the percentage?
I think 50%. The dentist, I would say around 60%.
60%.
But I don't know for what purpose. I mean, some of them might come
Just emergencies.
once for an emergency.
Yeah. Wow. See you later. That's really amazing. Huh?
We don't really know the exact number.
Oh, you will. You all will. You all have computers in your office, yes? You all have computers in your office? Yes? This is a yes answer. More than likely, if you have a computer in your office, it's server-based. You've got a server that you use, right? Within 5 years, everything will be cloud-based. As everything moves up to the cloud, they have algorithms that will crawl through the cloud, and they'll be able to get much larger data sets than you have now and be able to compare dentist to dentist. So things will change as the data starts to move in a different direction. It's really interesting. You've got technology moving at a very rapid rate. Moore's law is the chip doubles in speed every 18 months. I mean, if you look at 10 years ago at what you did technology-wise, where are you now? It's totally different than it was 10 years ago. I won't get into big data and data sets and analytics and all that, but it's really becoming, now that machines can talk to machines, now that a computer can talk to another computer and share their data without you there, that is going to change everything. All the things that you've done with patients is on your computer, but what happens when computers talk to each other in terms of there is now a software package, and you can write this down. Are you familiar with John Kois, who John Kois is in the States? There is now a software program in which you take your diagnostic data and you put it into this machine, and it comes out with a diagnosis and a treatment plan based on the evidence. If you look at cancer, for example, A.D. Anderson, they have the same thing with certain cancers. You plug in your diagnostic data, and out comes a diagnosis and the appropriate treatment plan based on the genetics and the history and the evidence that's available. The same thing with heart disease at the Cleveland Clinic. It won't be long before all that is accurate in terms of the way cases are diagnosed and treatment plan.
That is changing in Israel because the reform and the national health insurance law. While the most 95% of the dentistry was done in private practices without any data or without any aggregate data, who does what and when. Now we have about 800 practices that deliver service through the law by public funding. Now, these practices are already, we have data, as Dr. Natapov have shown, we have data, who's doing what to whom. So the data is at the beginning. We don't have big data, but it's a question of time.
You're getting there.
We'll get to it. So there is a start of quality assurance, at least in those 800 practices that deliver the public service. And I assume that they will influence many other practices that don't deliver the service, because this was what happened, for example, with the autoclaves. The moment we started to look that everyone has an autoclave in the practice, those who we didn't go to them have to have an autoclave too, because everybody has, so he must have.
I agree. It's the beginning of some massive changes in dentistry. Data, when it can be able to be compared to like data, gives you an insight into what is occurring, called best practice. If I have a diagnosis that I can put into a computer, and with my probing and my x-rays and my standardized photographs and all that stuff that you do, and out comes a diagnosis and treatment plan, something else will occur, and this is happening in medicine throughout the world, but a lot more in the United States, is most people in dentistry got paid by procedure. MOD, DO, crown, endo, doesn't matter. That's how you got paid. They are going to move away from that and not pay for the procedure itself, but for the outcome of the procedure and the value that the patient received. So reimbursement for dentistry, if it follows medicine, which it always does, is going to be paid on outcome and value. And it won't be long with the data that's coming in that will occur. My view here, if you look at what we're talking about, how can single practices afford to stay current with that? How can they stay current in terms of the ability to be part of that whole data set unless they are networked together? And as the costs go up, as we're seeing, how can they afford to deliver the care that's going to be required? So there are tremendous changes that we have to confront, and these are just some of them. Artificial intelligence is going to knock us for a loop. It's really remarkable what it can do. I have a client that has teaching his computers to see like human eyes through artificial intelligence. Now, what will that do to dentistry when it finally rolls out in 3 to 5 years, when it can look in a mouth and you have all that diagnostic data? It's going to change everything. And we won't even get into robotics, but they're dentists, everything is being... It won't, in 20 years, there'll be robots doing dentistry. So these are the kind of changes that are that cannot be handled by solo practice. So there's two kinds of changes that occur. One is evolutionary, and dentistry has been part of that whole particular area. First, it was X-rays by the dipping them and then moving them and then drying them and then mounting them and all of that, and then you went to digital. But it was a continuation of the same thing. So evolutionary change is gradual and it's incremental. It elaborates and embellishes what already has been, like a caterpillar getting larger, and the system stays basically the same, rotary phone to push button phone. A revolutionary change changes everything. It's rapid, it happens all at once. I have been in many countries over the last 10 years, and everybody walks around with a phone in their hand. It has changed everything. No one looks at each other anymore. They look at their phone. It has changed the way we relate to people. It has changed the way we communicate with people. It has altered, it has revolutionized. It has been a radical change, a revolutionary change in the way we live. Caterpillar to butterfly. Here's some examples in dentistry that are occurring. Right now you get paid per procedure, although you have a large HMO now, which is a capitated program. 650 dentists, I believe, or larger than that. And there's no oversight. It's basically a fee-for-service model. In most places, you're trying to figure out how to win the money game so that you can stay current. And the people who buy insurance, which is either the government or private, and you're getting more of that here than ever before, as you just said, what do they really know about dentistry? Well, if you take a look at what's going to be occurring in the world, you're not going to get paid for procedure, you're going to get paid for outcome. Did this work? More endodontics in the United States is done by endodontists to retreat poorly done endodontics. Retreatment is if you're an endodontist, what you do is you retreat cases that are failing. And so the area of specialty care is going to become more important, not less important in dentistry. Quality assurance is going to occur, which there is very little now, although the group practices that I work with now have quality assurance programs. You're moving into a capitated model here. You have expansion of your HMO services. That will continue to grow. The care will be managed. It won't be arbitrary. And the employer, whether it be the government or private, is going to get much more knowledgeable about what works and what doesn't work in dentistry. All right. There are things that I say that you don't think. There are things that I say that you don't think. And so when I say things that you don't think, remember I said don't believe me? This will be somewhat in the challenge for you to believe me. But I think it's critical that you hear what I'm about to say. Context is decisive. And the reason that I can stand here and talk about what I talk about with confidence is because I hold that principle as valid. Context is decisive. You don't get up in the morning and think that. You don't get up, oh man, what's the context I'm generating in my practice? That's actually leadership's job. I don't know what it's like around here, but in the United States, you don't see very many of those. What happened? That happened. When was the last time you wrote a letter? When you actually picked up a pen and wrote to somebody. What happened? That happened. In the United States, the malls are going out of business. 7,000 employees in retail are losing their job every week. Malls are closing. They used to be wonderful investments. No one goes. What happened? That happened. I don't know if you have Amazon here. Yeah. You do? By the way, I'll leak a little secret to you. But I don't know if you have, do you have Patterson Dental here? Do you have a supplier named Patterson? No? Amazon is in negotiation to buy the second largest supply house, which is Patterson. So Amazon's about to change everything by buying a dental supply house, and it will crush everybody else. It will eliminate the middleman. It's called disintermediation, because you won't have to pay for the brick and mortar and the sales force. What happens when you deal directly with a company like Amazon? It will change everything. This is to demonstrate solo practice. And in the United States, that used to be all there was. And today you have entities such as Heartland and Pacific. They have their own continuing education. They have their own internal management. They have their own resource system. They have what you do not have. If you're a dentist, you are at the chair 8 hours or longer per day. When do you have time to look at your numbers? When do you have time to go through and have human resource functions, performance reviews, salary reviews? When do you do that? Do you do that at all? So the real question for you is you're beginning to compete with larger entities that have more resources and more talent and more time than you do to run the business. Most dentists run their practice without understanding and looking at their numbers closely. It's like driving a car without a dashboard. How are you doing? That's why there's so many crashes. When you have a CFO and a CEO and a HR, human resource director, and they're doing everything that you can't do or don't have time to do and can focus on the dentistry and the patient, they're much more efficient at doing it. And as I said in the beginning, the cost per patient goes down ultimately after you get to be a certain size. So in my view, the context of dental practice has radically changed. And if we look at the evidence of that, well, the growth of managed group practices is extraordinary, 20% per year. Consolidations are happening in the insurance industry, as we'll see, because that's the future that we're at. When the economics gets to be a certain way, consolidation occurs so that you can reduce the cost of delivery. We'll take the Affordable Health Care Act out of this because I'm glad I'm leaving before Trump gets here. That's all I have to say. Good luck with that. We should not talk about that. That would take me forever. This could be a 3-day course. Big data is beginning to occur. And the influence of having dentists compared to other dentists. How long does a molar endo last by this dentist compared to a molar endo by another dentist? And then they'll be rated. You will be rated like in the United States, hospitals are rated by reinfection rate, readmission rate, patient satisfaction, all that stuff goes into it. And then they rate the physician in terms of their delivery of care. So for example, if you have a heart problem, what you do is you go to the Cleveland Clinic because they have the best outcome for heart care. And they know that compared to the rest of the people that are treating cardiac care. The real question and it won't be necessarily here, but in the United States, because it's one dentist per 1,800 people, they can't get to the people and access is a problem because of money. We want to have hygienists and specially trained dental assistants be able to deliver certain kinds of limited care, but the resistance by the organized dentistry is significant, but that will happen. That invariably will happen. It used to be when I was a dentist that you couldn't get from state to state without taking a state board. Now, as who I was as a periodontist, I could go anywhere in the country. And most of the specialists that are coming out of residency programs now are not opening their own practice, but going to work for group practices. They're itinerant specialists. And the percentage of those, as you will see, is less than 20%, maybe even less now, of specialists coming out of residencies are opening their own practice. So the evidence is pretty clear and mounting. You're not heavily insured in Israel, but the larger dental insurer in the United States is Delta Dental, and you may have heard of them before. They have acquired a risk management program in which they can begin to adjust their payment based on the risk. If you do not reduce the risk of caries or periodontal disease in your patient, the amount of money that you'll get for that procedure will be less. If the risk is controlled, you'll make more money. So it's now becoming, risk factors are becoming endemic in terms of how people are getting paid in dentistry. Now, and I think, how will single solo practitioners be able to adjust their practice to fit these new evolutionary models that are occurring? We had 7 new dental schools being built in the last 10 years in the United States. Insurance companies in the United States, Guardian and another one, Concordia, are now buying dental practices so that they can have what they call vertical integration. And it won't be long before you were talking about your public health service, someone wants to fund buying dental practices, that's going to occur as well. Nope, hit the wrong button. Now, I told you about the capital coming in, and it's enormous. And a couple of years ago, Heartland, which is the second largest dental entity, managed group practice, DSO, and we'll talk about what a DSO is, they got $1.3 billion for their third round of financing. So these people who, investment bankers, do their due diligence. They really look, they really try to figure out if this thing is going to make money. It's an investment for them. And what they see is that the larger the entity, the better run it is, the more margin it will create, and therefore they're taking a piece of the margin and they're investing into that. And I just mentioned what Amazon is up to. This is what our American Dental Association says: we are experiencing a significant change. The context is enabling rapid growth of managed group practices and shrinking the number of solo practices. Context is decisive. It determines what succeeds and what fails within it. Now, one of the manifestations of the change in context is there's a change in the system, and I'm finding this throughout the world. And although I haven't put my feet in the water of Israel, I would assume the same thing will happen here. So in the beginning, when you guys, most of you went into practice, you were the driver of this thing. You were the provider. And the patient would come to you and they would be the decision maker. You would say, here's what you need, here's how much it's going to cost, do you want to do it? You were the driver and the patient was the decider. So the balance of power went from the provider to the patient and the patient back to you. And the purchaser, whether it be private or government, was rather passive in this. And the payer plan, which is the insurance company, also was very passive. And that system was really good for solo practice, for single practice, because you had no interferences from other sides or other forces. When we take a look now, what's occurring certainly in the United States, the UK, more in Western Europe than anywhere else, certainly in the Netherlands, now certainly in Canada as well. There is a shift of power. So the person who buys, whether it be the government or the employer who buys insurance, they're becoming much more knowledgeable than they want to return on their investment. They're putting out money anywhere from $250 to $800 a month for dental insurance for their employees, and they want to know if it works or it doesn't. So they're going to the insurance companies, who are the middlemen in the United States, the payer plans, and the payer plans are becoming the decision makers. Let me give you an example. Delta in the Midwest will, if you say, I want to do an MOD on this particular tooth, and it had received an MOD less than 16 months previously, they won't cover it. So they are now deciding what kind of care can be provided. Same thing with if there was periodontal involvement and there is still inflammation and bleeding and you want to do a crown, you cannot do the crown. So they're taking the risk factors and they're taking the longevity and they're taking the outcomes. So the payer plan is now becoming much more of the decision maker, and the government or the employer is becoming much more of the purchaser. So the balance of power has shifted, and what it is now conducive to is group practice or managed group practice rather than solo practice. Goldman Sachs, you may have heard of. They're one of the largest investment bankers in the world. They put money into a lot of different things, and here's what they say. I'll just read the bottom line. The highest return on equity of any industry examined, of every industry examined, was dental practice management companies or managed group practices. So this is a pretty recent report. I happen to have worked with a number of hospitals, and this is a very outstanding particular entity, and it says, healthcare private equity investment, 5 areas to recommended in 2014. Hospitals and hospital systems, pain management, anesthesia, ambulatory surgery centers, urgent care, and dental practice management companies. I think they know what they're doing. In the United States, as of 2012, 67% of the practices were solo, and now in 2012, they are 57%. So there's a particular decline in the number of solo practices. And my prediction is by 2020, less than 20% of the practices in the United States, and probably the same pattern will occur globally, are going to be single practitioners. What will fill that void is the question that you ought to be engaged in. Well, if we're going this way, what's going this way? And how do we get into that stream? This is my analysis, so be careful. So in 2007, that blue bar that goes way up to the top was solo practice. By 2020, you can see it's decreased. The little green bar is managed group practice, and I'll talk about what that really means. And by 2020, it's going to be close to 60%, maybe closer between 60 and 80%. Family practices will go wherever they go. Now, there's a thing called a concierge practice, which we'll talk about. It serves the very wealthy. It's relatable to plastic surgeons here. And you may have a few sitting in the room, but it takes a lot of work to keep a concierge practice going. 73% of patients in the United States have some form of dental plan, and 9 out of 10 dentists take some form of dental plan. So the insurance industry is expanding. It's not contracting to a great degree, although it will flatten off. And out-of-pocket expense or copay is going to decrease because people don't have the money. They're paying more for the regular health care than they are. They don't. If it's between my heart and my teeth, I'm going to spend my money on my heart. There's a lot of movement in the insurance industry. There's HMOs and you have done a pretty good job in Israel, but there's also restricted insurance called PPOs. When I am a dentist in the United States and I am taking insurance, I sign an individual contract with the insurance company. And it's not, so they have control. If I don't like it, I don't have to be part of their insurance network. It is not a group, it is a network of which I have an individual contract. Insurance companies want to make money. Insurance companies, the way they make money is they sell their insurance to individuals and to employers. Because employers are spending more money on health care, they have less to spend on dental insurance. So in order to stay viable, they have to offer dental plans that are less expensive than the year before. How do they do that? Well, who's going to restrict their outlay of money is going to be the dentists. So they squeeze the dentists. Delta is probably 20% less in terms of its reimbursement than it was 5 years ago. This is an overall graph, and again, I'm getting a little technical here, but all it does is demonstrate that out-of-pocket expenses are going to go down, or copay, insurance is going to flatten out, and where the increase is going to come is from government. At this current time, at least in this comparison, when you take a look at where the revenues are being depicted, 25% of the revenues used to go to group practice in '92, and in 2007 it was 41%, and now it's closer to 60%. Now, as I said before, 20% of new dentists entering into some sort of dental practice ownership, that's it. So 2 out of 10 people in dental, by the way, I was lecturing in the senior class in the dental school in Minnesota. and I had all the seniors and the faculty, and I asked the seniors, how many of you are going to go into private practice? And they had 62 people in the class, and one person raised their hand. That kind of demonstrates. Now, in the world of business, an asset that is not transferable is called a liability. So here we have these practices in the United States, and we have no buyers for those practices. What are you going to do with your practice now? If you're planning on retirement, which many have done, that the asset value is going to, I'll be able to sell it to somebody, and you don't have a buyer, now what are you going to do? So there are fewer buyers, and I don't know what the ratio is, but by 2020, 47% of the practicing dentists in the U.S. will be women, and they don't want to own a practice. They want to work, they want to have a baby, they want to have a family, and they want to work 3 to 4 days a week, and they're perfectly happy to do that. And now with student debt being $300,000 to $400,000, males don't want to do it either, and we could talk a whole day about millennials, but millennials, they want freedom, they don't want to be bound by that. So the asset value of dental practice is diminishing, the amount of dental practices that are actually remaining viable is decreasing. And what's replacing them is these managed group practices, which we're about to talk about. Dental firms with more than 10 offices and the number of offices they could control has increased from 157 to 3,000 by 2007. Oh, and once again, sorry. So I'm going to talk about what I think you guys should start thinking about. So I'm going to be a little bit forward. 2 things that I've come to. One is I probably won't be back. No fighting. You know, one thing about the Israelis, they love to argue. It's always a Talmudic conversation here. It's like, okay. I'm going to tell you what I would do if I were in your shoes, given all that information that I've given you. And you could think about it. And remember, you don't have to believe me. You can put it under consideration. But I think you have a real opportunity, especially with a ratio of 1 to 800. And the expenses going up. Doesn't your staff ask for a raise? I'm sure they do. I'm sure it's cost more per your disposables than it ever has before, and for the mechanics, and for the new handpiece that gets thrown in the trash can, and for the little digital X-ray that costs $8,000. It's just, what are you going to do? So I'm going to recommend that you start to think in a new way about the future for yourselves. Now, there are, and I do this. This is what I do for a living now. Is I put dentists together into a managed group setting environment and have them generate the capacity to have a successful group practice, and it's really hard work for numbers of reasons which we'll get into. But those who can figure out how to do this, given where the future of dentistry is going, I think are going to be the most successful. Solo practices are going to have a more and more difficult time making it. So the first thing that usually happens when I start talking about, hey, solo practice is going out of existence, and managed group practice is the future. Oh, he's coming up. That means my time is short. Is that what it means? It's like the noose comes out, or the hook. Huh?
Lunch waiting.
Oh, okay. I will move along quickly, but thank you. So the first thing that happens when you go through a change like this is you're going to get upset, you're going to get angry. At some point, you're going to reach acceptance. I think the industry now is at acceptance in the area of managed group practice. If you read Malcolm Gladwell's work about the tipping point, particularly in the United States, when it reaches something between 15 and 17%, it's what everybody knows. Remember those cell phones that you weren't going to get, and then all of a sudden you had to have a cell phone? That's the tipping point. So here's what I see is the future. In an economic stressful time, consolidation dominates. You know, we now have 4 or 5 airlines. We don't have 20 as we had before. I don't know what it's like here, but I would assume you only have 3 or 4 cell phone providers. I assume that the things that come together, consolidation has a tremendous impact. Throughout the dental industry, all over the world, providers and dentists are consolidating their practices. Insurance companies are consolidating. Vendors are consolidating. And as I said, insurance companies are buying dental practices to control vertical integration. Why do people consolidate? Because it increases top-line revenue, it decreases costs, increases the profit-to-earning ratio, it increases EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, and depreciation and amortization. It enhances marketing. Right now, a solo practice in the United States is spending between $4,000 and $8,000 a month on their marketing efforts. And if you consolidate under one icon, like a Heartland, an Aspen, you can spend that kind of money, but a much greater impact, and have much greater penetration. If you're in the States, go turn on your television and watch your ads for Clear Choice. What is going to be the greatest barrier for you is consolidation only works when you collaborate. And I don't want to be accusatory, but the accusation is you guys stink at collaboration. Period. And why you fail at collaboration, and we'll end about here. So when you go to dental school, it's all about yourself getting through. I call it the I, me, my world. Here we are. And the I, me, my world is about what do I need to do, how do I need to do it, where do I need to go, how do I do it? So you think in the world of me, I. Oh, sorry about that. Then you go into a practice and you get you have probably a startup, and you have 1 or 2 people that you start to relate to, and it becomes about you and me. And then you get, the stronger solo practices that get up to 6 to 8 employees that are really doing pretty well, you learn how to work with team, and it becomes about us. But where you have real difficulty, where you have real trouble, is in the level of becoming an organization. You become political. You have right and wrong. You have finger pointing. It becomes an inability to work together to produce a vision, a purpose, and stay on purpose. So the past is the above, and the future is below, and that's going to be your greatest difficulty figuring this out. So the top is about what's best for me, and the bottom is what's best for the organization. And most dentists have real difficulty being an organizational level individual to participate in having the company come before them. And you ought to have less problems than anybody else. You've got to serve in the military. It's about country first. That you probably should be able to do it better than most other countries. I'll leave you in this particular last slide. There are lots of choices that you have. Can I have 5 more minutes? No? Okay, I want to end here. So the thing that I would like for you to do is to get to the entity where you can be a managed group practice, or what I call a DSO. If you can figure that out and get to work on that, I believe the future will be successful for you. But you'll have to change to be able to do that. Clear?
Can you repeat that, please?
Huh?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah. Well, I got the hook over here. If you guys can figure out how to connect, combine, collaborate, create an organizational structure together, and work through the issues and difficulties of doing that, you will be highly successful in the future, because that's the way dentistry is going. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.